last time.
Absolutely, don't you worry.
Okay. My computer is very slow at the moment. Hang on. Is yours going slow as well at the moment, Brett?
It's okay. It has said that the meeting has started and started recording, if that's what you're looking to do.
Yeah. Awesome. So I'm just going to share. I mean, I've made swifter starts, but we'll get there. Right, we should be there. Cool, cheers, Brett. Right, so welcome all. Brilliant Basics Part 3. And this one is organised coaching, which is probably the most bland sounding of the people acronym when it comes to great coaching. But we're taking this down a planning rabbit hole, and we're going to explore session planning, phase planning, and season planning. I'll initially cover session, and Brett is with us tonight, who is head coach of the ladies' performance program in hockey, for those of you that haven't seen him about or spoke to him. And Brett will take a lead on the phase and season stuff in particular, but Brett, do feel free to jump in when we go through the stuff on session planning as well. So this all links back to the we'll go through the plan for tonight, and I thought that'd be funny. The plan for this evening, was going to welcome and introduce Brett. We're going to go through the great coaching principles just by way of reminder, session planning ideas, what is phase planning, and then some proper reflections from Brett, who's 4 seasons into leading the performance program at Loughborough, and some reflections on those 4 years and what you've learned from a season planning perspective. And then hopefully some questions to make links back to our own coaching environments and have some things to take away. So just a quick recap of where we are. This is the sort of the series of workshops we're running. We have done person-centered and empowering. We are now on organised. 2 weeks tonight we have positive, and we will be putting in dates for learning and engaging in this series of great coaching principles. Cool. So we'll just go through some stuff on organised coaching and the resources that go out in this workshop when it takes its format under the UK coaching banner. We do it slightly differently for our Loughborough audience. So these are sort of the principles and the slides for organised coaching. And for me, this is about link to priming your session and sending things out to players before the start. So it's when it says provide clarity on how activities and sessions link together, letting players know what they're going to be working on, how they're going to be working on it before a session, and sort of managing expectations and creating that little bit of psychological safety around what you're going to be doing when you get to training. This is what that links to. So yeah, definitely sending things out to prime. And actually, I think it helps you get to see sort of emergent leadership behaviours. So if you start to prime a group before a session starts with, do we need these people in teams? These are the activities. Players then take that information. They have an opportunity to look at it and lead, rather than just be waited told what to do from the coach. So this one definitely links to priming your session. The second one would be, yes, confidently facilitate the session, providing relevant activities to meet session outcomes. To me, the word of facilitate, not coach, in this instance is really crucial. So my line of thinking would be, if the session isn't properly facilitated and it runs incoherently, then it's actually very difficult to coach and get around to doing any coaching. So the facilitation of a session and the nuts and bolts and the running of a session actually frees up the time for you to coach. And that doesn't have to all sit on the coach or coaching team. They can, if you have support staff, volunteers, injured players, another coach, the players themselves, the facilitation of a session can be a group thing, and you can arrive at it together. And actually, you want as a coach more opportunities to have coachable moments. So as little labour you have to put into facilitating the session is actually a good thing, I think, from a coach's perspective. So responding dynamically, provided differentiated activities as needed without impacting the session and experiences for all. So the principle that I have in my planning that links to most for this is plan for interaction. So allowing time in each session for discussion, which is athlete to athlete, coach to athlete, athlete to coach, but be deliberate in having that time in. So it's all well and good having lots of learning moments and coachable moments, but then ignoring them because you go, actually, it's 15 minutes in, we should be doing X, Y, Z, and you miss the opportunity to have the interaction. So definitely plan for those interactions and feedback moments and check-in moments. And again, like being flexible when you plan, another thing that I like to think about is if you want to extend a discussion because it's a learning moment in a session, you have to be comfortable losing something in the session. So if you're on the pitch for another 45 minutes and you want to do 3 blocks of 12 with 3-minute water breaks, but your one discussion goes over by 5 minutes, you can't magic it back. You have to be comfortable about where you're going to lose your time. So just knowing those little workarounds, where you're going to get the time back, where you can flex, and actually planning for interaction, because human beings invariably do want to talk and interact, is something pretty important as well. And highlight and manage any hazards and provide reassurances for perceived and actual risk for people taking part. So this links to all your basic stuff you do in a level 1 about making sure the area is safe and all that kind of stuff. But actually now it's really pertinent with the COVID stuff. So it's really important to make sure players sort of feel reassured that the environment is safe, what's been done, and that obviously is mega important in this current climate. And it also links to how hard a session is, I think, as well. So coming out of this period that hopefully we're going to be coming out of soon, there's a safety risk around overexertion, people trying to catch up, work too hard, get injured. So making sure that you're checking in with people around their level of exertion, current levels of fitness, that sort of stuff, that could be a risk coming out of this as well. So those interactions around your basics of health and safety, your COVID specific health and safety, and then how players are approaching sessions, particularly in this period, are all too important. So that seems a really basic thing, but actually mightily important for a number of contexts. Right, so what I wanted to share with you now is a few examples of session planning and how it might look in document form, how that then might manifest itself on the pitch. And when we've covered session, we'll start to link to phase and season. So I have ripped this off something called the Coach's Voice Academy, which is linked mainly to football. So it's entirely football. So this is a good example of how Invasion Games may plan. So there's certain things that I like in how their session planning stuff is done. It leans quite technically and tactically heavy, but they've got some really good bits. So the things that I think they do really nicely would be the diagrams, the key, that sort of stuff. The presentation piece is really good. But if we look closely, there's a nice thread of why, how, and what that runs through their session. So if we take it back a step, you'll see that they have some principles that it's linked to. So this is taken from a team, an academy level team somewhere, where there's some principles that they're working to. So finding spare player, up, back and through, and controlled build up. They're the 3 principles that they're working to. Then there's the practices. So we know their why, the link to the principles. They reference them again in some of the planning detail, but this gets into the how. So how are we going to do it? Well, it's going to be this practice with these conditions, and this is how the practice works. So they cover the how really well, and then the what is the technical detail. So these are the things they're trying to get the players to experience and explore through the session. So really clear, concise. Well, it's actually quite wordy, so it's not that concise, but it's very clear. But a why, a how, and a what running through the thread of their sessions. They do it again on the second practice, which again links back to principles, gives a very good sort of how, and then the what. These are the things we're kind of looking for, the in-possession detail, the out-of-possession detail, and it's just nicely broken down and detailed. Things it doesn't do, and now things I wouldn't do with this session plan, it doesn't show timings and the space for interaction, but again, I don't think people log on to this resource for that. I think they log on for the technical, tactical detail, but they're things that I think would be included. And it doesn't, I wouldn't rather send this as a priming session plan to players. I think it probably is quite, well, it depends on your group, but quite overbearing and wordy. And I actually think if you send this out, it probably contains this bit, particularly the coaching detail bit, might contain too many of the solutions to the problem that you're trying to share. So if we're talking about priming and sending stuff to players prior to the start of a session, maybe this is less appropriate. But from a planning perspective and linking to your principles and having that thread of why, how, and what running through your session, I think it's really good. And from a visual perspective, it's quite smart as well. So in terms of priming, I thought maybe I'd share one of my own examples that players did receive. So This is a session this year when we're allowed to do hockey, which was good, from September. And it was, just to give an eye on the date, I think it was 3-4 days before our first league game for the development group, which is below the performance group at Loughborough. So like our second team squad. So they had a session leading to the start of their season. And they'd not had a huge amount of friendlies because they had a cup to complete. So they'd not had tons of time with this new group. So basically the brief was have a really competitive training session and try and get lots of, will to win and make it really as game-like as we could, but trying to stay true to our principles as well. So the session looked like this, and this is what went to players. So what it takes to win tournament. There's timings, there is pitch shape, there's how long you're going to be playing for, how long you're going to be resting, the roles are defined, what the way to win is defined, the prize is defined. So the winning team got a selfie on the Ladies Hockey Club Instagram. So everything that's going to happen in the session or could happen in the session, from what you might experience as a player, apart from like the individual actions of you'll pass the ball when you pass the ball, whatever, was probably covered. So this sort of reduces that anxiety, because the expectation was it was going to be a hard session. It was that, but that was shared. It wasn't just put on them before the warm up, like it's going to be difficult today kind of thing. They knew that it was going to be hard. We also shared the game and the themes. So, and then the coaching roles within that. So all the players got this the night before, the type of game, how you win, and then a block of corners, that penalty corners for us, set pieces basically, and then repeat. Then we had a physical challenge. They knew there was going to be a physical challenge for both teams to complete. Again, reduce anxiety by sharing the night before, build a little bit of trust maybe by sharing the night before and in the priming. And logistically, this saves you a ton of time, and it's good for COVID because you don't use bibs. Who wears what, and who's on what team, and what the roles are for the next day. We had an injured player as well, and they had that to print off and bring for their session. So they had to do all the scoring and stuff like that, and timing. So that was a session that went out to players, as opposed to the first session, which was very detailed and a little bit maybe intensive for them to go through. You'd probably want to distill this session into something much smaller to send out to players. So maybe the technical detail goes out without the bullets underneath. So here's some things to consider: positioning, body position, pass detail, timing of running, like a prime in WhatsApp or some slides via WhatsApp. This is obviously PowerPoint slides that I did, but I saved it to a PDF and it goes out on WhatsApp, and it's very easy for the players to read. And again, about as much as I'd want to send to a group of players the evening before or morning of a session. So there's just a few ideas on session planning and priming in particular. So we're going to start to connect the session stuff to phase and season. And on that, I'm going to throw to Brett with my initial question. And Brett, it isn't one I've prepped you for, actually, but is it's a very abstract question. Phase and season planning, is it a map or a compass for you navigating the season?
Really good question, and I'm going to answer it in two ways. I think, and it probably links to something we'll talk about later on. I think when I started this role, so as Andy said at the beginning, I've been in this role now for 4 years. I think it was probably more of a map, and the map was probably not necessarily my ego, but it's definitely my ability to try and put everything down on paper that I wanted everyone to be aware of and what we wanted to do. And there was lots of stuff going on. I think over time, I'm definitely drifting more towards that compass. And again, I'm in the fortunate position that Andy coached us in the program. We've got a few other coaches to help us at different times throughout the week and throughout the season. We then have a team of staff. So we have physio, S&C, intern nutritionist, intern performance analysis, and all these different people at different jobs. Trying to create a map for everyone was really, really difficult because maybe we didn't have the expertise for everyone to do the best job they can do and give them the data they needed. But actually just giving them that compass allows them to have the direction they need to travel, and they can then add the detail in or whatever building blocks they need to put in place in order to head in that direction. If I was to try and put the compass in place when I first started, I probably wouldn't have been able to, or wouldn't have been able to as well as what hopefully I can do now, because it really takes time to understand what is needed, or what I believe is needed to get that compass pointing in the direction that is true north, to use that kind of analogy. So kind of answer your question two ways there, Mr. Gibson, but I would say more compass now, and I think I'm seeing the success of that, but definitely as a map view when I first started.
Perfect. So to continue down that analogy, do you feel now more flexible, and your ability to change course is probably better now than it was at the start?
Yeah, I'm going to answer that in two ways again. Hope it doesn't become a theme. I think the overall target is probably pretty fixed. So I think the direction of travel is pretty consistent, and it's pretty consistent year on year. So for us in our hockey program, we want to be competitive in terms of our games, and I use that word pretty deliberately, and I might come back to that in a bit. But also want to develop the individual, really value the individual, and prepare them for their transition post university. Now, actually, they're reasonably broad. However, the direction of travel is pretty obvious. We're going in that direction, competitive in the games, but really focused on the individuals and what they need to be prepared for post Loughborough hockey, but also post Loughborough. So there's a piece around hockey, but also a piece around the holistic view of how I want to develop these people. Where I think, and the second part of my answer, where I think I'm much more comfortable in deviating is the way in which we get there. So using the map and the kind of ship analogy, sometimes you've got to go into these rocky waters, or you've got to go away from these rocky waters, and actually converge off course a little bit, as long as you head towards that end goal. And that end goal probably doesn't change. It's probably the course in which you get there changes. And again, I'm more than comfortable. And this year in particular is testament to that, because I don't think we've gone on course for more than about 4 weeks.
So that actually, I was going to ask this question right at the end, but now is the perfect time before you start to share how you get into the nitty gritty of how you plan phases in season, Brett. You've just said about the end in mind piece probably doesn't change, but how we get there does, which means that seemingly there's lots and lots of different ways to get to where you want to go. How do you then decide the route to take when there's seemingly lots of different ways to get there?
Yeah, it's a good question. I'm just trying to think if there's one way, and it's probably not, to be honest. I think I'm in a fortunate position now that I have this staff group that's around me. So the kind of naive approach would be, I'm head coach, I know all the answers, this is the way we're going to do it, everyone follow me, this is the way we need to do it. And who knows, it might be the right way of looking at things, but it's actually the ceiling, the kind of maximum I can get out of that situation is my knowledge and my experience. I've got 10 other staff in the room. Actually, there might be a better idea that comes from someone else. So in a roundabout way, I'm kind of answering the question by going, I think it's more of a discussion based, predominantly probably from the staff and the experts that we have kind of in the room, but we'd definitely join the players up in that in a different kind of way depending on where we are in the season. So we have a leadership WhatsApp, we have a kind of a wider group representative, and we have reviews where all players would engage in it in some way, both kind of reflecting on what we've done, but also very much involved in the planning of what we're going to do next, be it phases, be it season on season, and that kind of stuff.
Right, perfect. So it'd be a good time for you to get into phase planning, Brett, and talk about how basically what is a phase for you, what makes you decide on the start and end of a phase, and what kind of inputs make you decide on what that phase looks like. So something happens between point X and point Y, call it a phase. What things influence what happens in that phase for you? So what it is, how you do it, and what's important. If you've got your phase documents up, you can just go into sharing and stuff if you want to. But yeah, answer that however you want, really.
Yeah, 2 parts. No, I'm joking. Well, it might be a good chance to maybe just engage people who are listening and use as a chat if that's
good idea.
So maybe, for you guys that are listening, what would you consider to be a phase? So how would you split up? So again, put in context of my world, when you think about this and put it in the chat, think of your world. So we have a season. So we come in for pre-season somewhere at the beginning of August, depending on when our league starts and that kind of stuff. League starts mid-September and we'll go into Easter, and then we'll plan for a bit of time afterwards where we call our summer training, which is more individual focus rather than team and matches. So my question to you guys that are listening, what would you consider to be a phase? How would you break a phase up? What things would determine one phase to the next? And maybe even put in there why you'd even have a phase, why you've not got a season plan where you do 35 weeks or whatever it is from start to finish.
Cool.
You guys feel free to be vulnerable, as we have to do as coaches. I'm on here talking about everything, my warts and alls, and kind of what is good, what's bad. Opportunity to kind of do the same. That's definitely a strong trait as a coach, knowing that you're not always right, putting yourself out there.
You can use the chat box, guys, but if you want to unmute yourself and put your camera on, please feel free to do so.
Patience is always a virtue, Brett.
All good. You live in this online world now. However, just to fill the time, was on an online Zoom yesterday. It was his first online Zoom.
No.
How had it happened? Out in Australia, hockey coach out there. Oh no, sorry, in America, and it's his first Zoom session.
Right.
How's he got away with that?
Lived under a rock. To be fair, I'm not envious. Right. Livia's put focus on specific technique, a new part of performance for a few weeks, and once his level of mastery, move on to the next. That sounds familiar.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can relate to that for sure. Thank you, Olivia. Good job. Got in there first. Extra brownie points. You're going your way. Cool. Callum's put one in as well. Yeah, completely agree. So maybe pre-season becomes a phase, and it is for us as well. Individual blocks of games, maybe period of time that are probably equal. So 4 or 5 weeks at a time or something like that. Yeah, okay. So Callum, just on that, do you mean just time, or maybe like there might be 3 or 4 games in a row that mean something? You might be the top teams, you might be the bottom team, something like that. Is that what you mean? Type in the chat, or feel free to unmute and share.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
I'm going to unmute myself. More based on, so I work with the men's performance football squads. So more for me based on, maybe it might be a set of games coming up with midweek games, 3 or 4 in a bounce might be really important. Then we might end up, as you've seen with this season, having a massive layoff of, a month at a time. So purely based on the period of time can change, but the importance of the games and how many games in a block might change.
Yeah, thank you. Really good. Thanks for sharing that. And again, when we get into it, it may then change what you want to do with the players and what the staff do in that period. So if you've got 4 weeks in football, who knows how many games, 50 maybe. You've got 5 games in one 4-week block, but then you've got a 4-week block where there's 8 games, say. Actually, everyone's outlook on that period is going to be very different. So yeah, nice point. Great. Gibbo, are you trying to talk? You're on mute, by the way.
Second time you got me today with that one. Yeah, so there's a couple more flying in. I've got the chat up on my iPad now, so I can see it, which is good. So micro and macro phases. So if you got, I don't have your name because it doesn't show on the chat on the iPad. But if your question was about micro and macro phases, just explain what. Yeah, thank you. What you mean by that and how that relates to your program, basically. Evie might have muted as well.
Hiya, sorry. I'm not sure how to get my name up on that, but just in micro phases in terms of more short-term plans, focusing on like I don't know, maybe that month, that's the phase, or this is our plan, this is our goal, and then more macro phases for the year, or maybe our long-term goals, and focusing more long-term, what do we want to achieve, things like that.
Yeah, it says we've got in the chat as well short-term and specific goals that lead to long-term. So you're on about that's the same kind of thing. Your micro plan being a building block for your macro plan, your short-term goal being a building block for your long-term goal. Definitely resonates. Different stage of the season. We've got pre-season halfway. I'm sure you'll get into this, Brett, but related to periodization, which you talk about a lot, but I think now might be a good time to delve into your phase planning and kind of what inputs you consider. Because I know there's some things that we talk about a lot, like exams, we talk about competition calendar, we talk about the international calendar, which impacts a lot of our players, and actually getting it perfect for everyone's probably not plausible, but your skill is kind of plotting what's most right for the most people at that time. So that'll be really cool just to see your sort of thought process on this.
Yeah, perfect. And just firstly, thanks everyone for putting your ideas in the chat box. Really, really good ideas. And we can link back some of those things as we kind of get into it. So that's great. Moment of truth, sharing my screen. Here we go. Got a pinkish kind of screen in front of you there, Gibbo?
Yeah.
Perfect.
That's familiar.
So this is our annual plan. And this is, first today is very much a working document. You'll see when I go to the next page in a second. The first tab here is actually that compass that Andy mentioned. This is now pretty much how we make our decisions. So on the outside, the white bit was our goals. Finish top 4 in Bucks might be a bit of a challenge, given we haven't got any Bucks games. And this bit in the middle is kind of just that compass. So hopefully the IDT staff that I work with have a fairly good idea of this being what we're trying to work towards. So biggest thing that holds everything up in the middle is that value in the individual. Players only be at Loughborough for a certain period of time. If we had that team view being all the way in the middle, we're going to miss some opportunities to really develop the players. Up here on the bottom is actually what I get judged on, so the university's strapline in terms of what we're trying to achieve, and then us within hockey, we're trying to create the best hockey development environment in the world, which is very difficult to try and quantify, but that's the goal we're trying to aim for. Can we do everything to the best we can that's hopefully going to be world leading? And then I've got kind of 4 pillars around here around what we want the program to be doing. So we want the program to be developing decision makers. We want the program to be pushing players beyond what we think their USPs are. So typically a Loughborough University team will be fit, fast, skillful, maybe quite a lot of passion that goes into it, like scoring goals, that kind of stuff. And that's great. And we've got to work to those strengths. But if we only work those strengths, what are we not working on? And actually a big thing for us this year is working on things we're probably not as good at and what maybe not known for. Actually, probably spent the last couple of years we've really pushed for that. And as a consequence, actually, we're having much better success in a more rounded way. We're doing the things we do well, but also we're doing things we've typically not done well much better. Obviously, the gym facilities and the SC coaches here are phenomenal. We could quite easily so if you were a player within the hockey program, for example, we can literally minute by minute schedule your lives. And that's great. You'll leave in 3 years' time, maximizing your physical capabilities and everything else you're doing. But once you leave that door, do you have the knowledge to be able to go and apply that yourself in the real world? So instead of our nutritionist giving you protein bars after the game, can we educate people around what is good nutrition so they can make good decisions themselves? And then when they leave university, they can continue that lifelong sport, lifelong performing at the top level without having someone there the whole time. And then finally, the thing that's really important to us is Loughborough is Loughborough. And actually, what can you do for this period of time in Loughborough? How can you make this history being the best history of the whole Loughborough hockey programme? So they're really important. And then that is our compass. This then becomes a bit more of the map. So it's going to look pretty busy first and foremost. The bit that's probably relevant to the question that you posed, Gibbo, is these are our phases, or again, these were our phases pre-COVID when we were able to put a bit of a roadmap out in front. So we had our pre-season, early August, going into our first game, mid-September. This year in particular, we had a fairly big focus on our pre-season, so that became a phase, whereas that was never really a phase before. But given everyone sitting down, lockdowns and all the rest of it, we felt that bodies would be conditioned and be fit, but probably weren't hockey fit, weren't in the hockey type positions, change of direction, all the kind of things that you would naturally be doing, probably wouldn't be happening. So we put a big focus on that, mainly for injury prevention rather than the fitness stuff you would normally associate it with. And this goes all the way through Christmas break, and then we kind of go into what the summer looks like. The first thing you'll notice, this is much barer than what this half was, because this is where we've been through. My original planning that normally sat there is now over here, and it'll be hopefully copied and pasted, lifted in at some point in the future where we can then say this is what we're doing. And we've probably moved away from this bigger annual plan, and we've worked on more bespoke phase plans as a staff group. Something you mentioned a second ago, Andy, around key dates. So this is kind of what we call our threat to practice and threat to competition. So Freshers Week is a threat. People's sleeping patterns, their lifestyles may change a little bit in that period, and ultimately rightly so. You're only going to be a first year once, and it's important to have that experience. Sadly for us, we're in game 3, which was, as Andy remember, the biggest game of the season at that point. We were playing Hampton and Westminster, team that got promoted with us the year before, team that if we wanted to be successful in the league, we needed to beat. And thankfully we did beat them 4-2, which is great. Turn then started the week afterwards. So actually, what does that mean for our players? What will they experience? What will their cognitive load and cognitive kind of abilities come into training be like if they've sat in lectures all day? If we have a really hard mental session, are they going to be really able to grapple with that? Is that the right way to go? There was some international stuff. We factored in a deload week. We had some exams and terms starting post-Christmas. What would normally be a big kind of competition phase for us is in here. So for us, actually, player availability is our biggest roadblock to success. So actually, what can we do in this phase here that will enable player availability to be at its highest? Is how we kind of structure the season. And then what sits above is all the kind of things we spoke about on the page before. So this is all well and good, and the bits that sit underneath is where all the different disciplines within the sport can then contribute to it. So, for example, the pre-season phase in our strength and conditioning was creating a routine, 2 or 3 gyms a week, 2 or 3 conditioning a week. We then got into a different routine where it's 2 gym training sessions. There was a big increase in terms of explosive force and other bits and pieces. And you see everyone's kind of inputting into those kind of bits and pieces. That's all well and good, but it doesn't really tell you what we actually were doing, which is where this next part kind of comes in. And this is now the phase plan, where it's a bit more detail. The nuts and bolts are kind of in place a little more. And this is adapted probably over time. So phase, this is called being better than before. So this is the phase we've just, we're kind of coming out of post-Christmas exams. And going forward from there, it's changed from what we actually did because of the national lockdown. This is obviously planned before Christmas. We have an emphasis, which is what we want the main focus of the phase to be. And then we have some objectives that we're looking to deliver within that, which will then make the emphasis in the phase be what it needs to be. I guess the bit that's probably quite important before I touch on other little bits is, given these being the objectives, it's then looking at, okay, well, how do we do that? These are not necessarily specific to each discipline. So, for example, gradually build up players' workload. That could be hockey, that could be S&C, that could be physio. And within this, everyone's got a bit of a different contribution to it. But it's that compass model again. So when Mike, our physio, works with one of the players, he knows that he's looking to gradually build up. He's looking for the players to have really clear expectations. He's looking for those that were not in exams to have challenge, and being a place so we can produce our best performance when we come out of this phase. So all his communications, what he plans, everything he does can head in that direction, instead of potentially me saying, right, Mike, or with player X, I want you to do this, with player Y, I want you to do this, with player etc., which is a mountain of work for me. I just need to be really clear on what I think the objectives for this phase should be, and staff can go be brilliant in their way they can be brilliant. And then from a hockey perspective, there's probably some clarity needed for all the staff in terms of what we're going to be focusing on, because that could then influence how they bring the objectives to life. So for us, tactically, there were the 2 things we're going to try and master. Technically, they're the things that are top of the list in terms of priorities, with a little bit of detail that sits below it. This is where our physical demands were, and this was kind of where our social element was. And given we're exam periods, actually we're looking to try and get the most of it. So really buy into it, come into sessions, hitting the standards we normally hit to, and then people are done. They can do their exam prep and all that kind of stuff that sits alongside it. Underneath is then goes to schedule what it actually looks like. So these are the sessions within that phase, and they're color coded. So green is relatively light. So that was our first week back, gradually building people back in, so back into this phase. We then had our amber, which is like a typical session. Red is our above game demands. They're normally pretty hard. And again, that look pretty simple. And they're 2 kind of recharge days that kind of sit within it. So in essence, that's pretty much what a phase plan would look like for us. Just going back to some of the comments from before, and I'll pull that annual plan back up. They're all slightly different in length. So pre-season is generally 6 weeks. That's pretty static. 4 weeks, 4 weeks. I think we moved one when we got into it to be slightly less because we had a couple of double headers that looked like they were going to come up. So that period got condensed a little bit. Next period got expanded and so on. So it's set at the beginning of the year, but then pretty flexible as we go in. Back to your point earlier around the course may change to get to that end goal. Cool. I feel like I waffled for a little bit there, Gibbo. There's probably some points to maybe bring out or questions that come out from that, I hope. Oh,
yeah, absolutely. I don't want to be one. I don't want to be the one to take first dibs on this, Brett, because, like you say, there's a lot to sort of discuss there, and probably people want to probe a bit deeper. And we've just had a question now, so it's a good one. How do you objectively measure these elements of your culture to help you reflect and adapt your compass model? And how do you make sure you incorporate these into every session?
Great question. Deep, lots of questions there. So
yeah,
bits that sit within here. So this bit in the middle actually came from the players. So we did a lot of work on our culture back end of last season, and essentially they come up with the 3 kind of pillars for them, which was they want to be a team. So we're very collective when we do things. We look out for each other. We try and wear the same when we go to games. All those kind of things that just mean when people look at us, they say, oh, they're a team. We're tough to beat, and that was one of the reflections we had going into last year. We probably conceded too many goals. We stepped up into the Premier League, so it was harder. But there's some certain things we thought we could do much better to concede less goals and be more successful in games. So that was a mantra that we wanted to start to live out, both in training and then hopefully into matches. And there's some stuff off field that we could do with that. And then we had a mantra at the end, which was great players, but better people. Actually, what are we doing? Probably more so off the pitch to help each other out, to maybe look to do things in the community, to probably create a connection, create a sense of community within ourselves. So that came from the players. We then agreed that this is something we want to try and live by, which is exciting, tough and adaptable. Hits our USPs, but also hits areas that are outside our USPs. So when I go away and plan the phases, it's always kind of there within it. So it's there at the top of annual plans. Going into our phase plan, it's in there as well. So that diagram's there. It's always front and center. I did bring up a session plan, I think, as well. Here we go. If I bring this up on screen, this is a real simple session plan we kind of had out, but again, tough, exciting adaptables in there. And I'd hope, so this would then come from the phase plan. Just trying to think if there's any kind of cultural stuff that comes out of it. So potentially there's a bit of a focus on desire to score in here.
Yeah.
Which again, probably links into being exciting and tough. In terms of the question around how do we objectively measure, I think it's very hard to objectively measure culture. So it probably comes from conversation with players, reviews that we do with players. So at the end of each phase, I'll probably either chat with the leaders, with our staff, relay what we're trying to get out of the phase and see if they think we were close to that or whether we achieved it. And then at the end of each block, there's a bit of a bigger review we do with all the players. So end of pre-season, mid-season of Christmas, and the end of season. We've done it in different ways in the past, but pre-COVID times, all sit in a room together. No staff in terms of hockey staff that are there, someone helping facilitating, discussions, things that are written down on paper. Culture is a big thing that we talk about. Are we living and breathing things we said we're going to be living and breathing? And that then gives us the feedback that we're hoping, well, some of the feedback that we're hoping to. Anonymous questionnaires online, something that we've looked at before. Individual conversation with players and stuff like that will probably help with that too. Give it, looks like you're gonna say something.
I was making a few notes actually.
Oh, okay.
Just nodding in agreement with what you said about objectively measuring culture. I think if you it's a very good question. And if you found a way to objectively measure culture, I think you'd make a lot of money, because it is subjective, and you have to kind of, the way you measure it is by a coach having their finger on the pulse and lots of different conversations. So if Brett only spoke to me as his assistant coach and the leadership team, he'd miss things. There'd be blind spots. So we make sure we attend to all corners of the team. So I have a selection of players that I do one-on-one, as does Brett for their one-on-ones. We interact. If there's been an interaction in the gym with Anne, that players are feeling low, down, upset, there's some tension, Brett knows. So like utilising the eyes and ears across the squad. The leaders are very comfortable coming forward with things. So like attending to culture isn't like you don't have a culture and then check it every 3 months. It's kind of a daily thing that you attend to. And that helps it be as objective as possible, but it is almost always subjective. And there is always almost a blind spot somewhere. It's just about minimising it. So I think what Brett does really well is utilise staff and leadership to make sure that the culture has been attended to. I think it's a really good question. But I think you just got to
jump in the caveat. Thanks for the compliment, Gilman. I appreciate that. But equally, right. I don't think I do it perfectly. And I think for it to be as close to objective as possible, saying that you've got your culture in a good spot, is actually what people do when we're not there. So actually, what are players doing when they're not there? If there's something they see that's probably not fitting with the culture, are they speaking to other people and saying, that's not what we do here, or the combination of that kind of ilk? That probably is the real measure of this. So one of our pillars is trying to develop decision makers. Actually, when we're not there, are they able to still make the decisions and make good decisions based on where they want to go in their journey, and hopefully some of the foundation that we put in place for them. Just going back to incorporating into every session, it's my view of it. It's not something you do everything. So you won't do everything all the time. At some point, a bit like a graphic equalizer. So sometimes you're really going to turn up the tough part of what we're trying to be. So really tough to beat. So as Gibbo shared, that real physical session might be one that's a really tough session, and actually that dials up the dial there. But the week afterwards, actually, you might need to do real adaptable sessions. You might throw lots of problems at them in the session. So you've lost a player. Actually, now you lost another player. Your goalie's been sent off. This happening. You're a goal down. You're a goal up. And in that session, you're actually developing the adaptability, et cetera, et cetera. So it's probably something you don't see all the time in every session, but over a course of a week, month, a phase, you're definitely seeing it all there, or hopefully you're seeing it all there. And the utopia is the players are then living and driving it.
A really good example of what you just said, Brett, is we've not been able to train through exams this time round. But normally in exam period, the players still train the same amount. But they have different stresses. And we generally, in the last few years, have gone back to practices that the players kind of know how to do, they're familiar with, they've done before, not tons of new information. And we're not trying to get in anything new, really, through the exam period. It's kind of practices they've done before, maybe even and things that we've already covered. So it doesn't feel like they're getting pushed cognitively during the day and pushed cognitively in the evening. We make the sessions quite hard, so there's that endorphin rush, but it's stuff that they've done before. So that's kind of another input for your phase plan, isn't it? Like the state of the players and where they're at in terms of the year. And that's just a good example of something we consider.
Yeah, I guess probably just to add that tiny bit to the other part of the question, how does your compass change? Just back to the original point, I think that the overall compass always stays the same, but it's that bit that changes in between. And this year it's been very much having to adapt. There's no other options, but trying to build as many people into that conversation as possible around what should the next phase look like. Really fortunate the leaders we've got in the group at the moment have been there for a few years, so they've got a really good grasp of what has happened, what players tend to like and be impactful, and what the next steps could be. And there's definitely times when I've said, this is something we can look to do, and they've turned around and went, I don't think that's really gonna work, and then we'll adapt it. And there may be times where I just think, actually, no, this is something that is really important. This is something we're going to drive through and make that decision and comfortable with it.
Olivia just asked a really good question. How do you manage and drive the team when they don't have goals at the end of the phase to aim for? And that's she's caveated that with COVID interfering. So COVID has made a big kind of mess of this phase that we're in and we're driving for. And it's a bit foggy, like the end in mind, now a little bit foggy in this phase. I think you'll probably agree as we're going through it. It has been.
Yeah.
So how have we managed this bit with the COVID interference, I guess, is the best way of framing that.
Yeah, and not necessarily typically in sport, but sport we have lots of markers to aim for. We've got a game in so period of time, you've got end of season, you've got cup, you've got some really good objective measures. And it's very unusual not to have them. So it's maybe not unusual that motivation is gonna wane at this kind of point. Why should I put the extra running session in? Why should I do that extra set? Because I don't know when it's going to be needed necessarily. And I'll give you a real life example today, actually. So some of our players have been down and training with the senior squad, some of our elite players. I've done some games down at their hub down at Bisham. And they finished. I've just been calling and checking in with them. And one of the players turned around to me and said exactly that. I'm just struggling at the moment to really force myself to get outside and do the conditioning plan. Whereas in lockdown 1, she was really excited by it, really happy. It was a bit novel. She knew it was going to come to an end and there was a season kind of impending. So we had an interesting conversation, and something that we've just kind of discussed is actually what are the little markers, what are the little goals. So she wants to develop a speed. So actually, why don't we just do a bit of a speed test now, see where she's up to, put a 4, 5, 6 week plan in place that's going to do some work on her speed and see how she goes with that. So it's not a game, it's not a cup final, it's not the usual stuff that you're going to go for, but what are the little more process type goals you can kind of fit within it. The other avenue we've taken for this block in particular is getting the players to really reflect on their game, reflect on where they are, and trying to pass quite a lot of ownership over what this next period looks like. So we've got a week of reflection for this week's our deload week, and then we've got a 4-week block which may extend to 6 weeks where they're going to choose the areas they really want to focus on. We're not going to be on the pitch, unfortunately, so it won't be necessarily the tech and tack quite so much, even though we can do some video tactical work, which we're going to embed into it. But it might be certain aspects of performance, it might be some mental skills, it might be some nutritional bits and other bits and pieces where they can define that path a little bit. And I think that is hopefully going to manage a little bit more of their motivation. Ultimately, though, it's probably not going to be where it would be if we had a huge game coming on the Saturday.
There is some research to suggest that's the right way to go as well, Brett, about that. I don't know if I sent you the stuff about it, but that motivation to learn, and the people learn and develop if they identify the areas that they learn and develop in. So if you let people nominate that, go through their IDP, these are the areas, they're more likely to access those areas and develop them than if we put a map out and said, try these things, do these sessions, learn about this phase of play. They'd probably do it somewhat, but if they identify, they're more likely to go and do. So I think that's when you got the opportunity to do that, it's really important to tap into it.
Yeah, 100%. And we'd be the same, right? I'm sure you guys on the call will be exactly the same. If I'm told to do something, my motivation is slightly different compared to if I decide this is what I want to do. And maybe some people at different times actually need that person to go, right, Andy, you need to do this because this is the reason that it's going to make you better or whatever it is that you need to do it. And actually that might be enough of a motivating factor. But if you highlight that yourself and go, actually, I really need to work on a phase planning, for example, and you seek out some type of conversation with, go and give some ideas a go, and actually your motivation is going to gain momentum potentially.
So we have another question, Evie, I believe. Do you have a separate sports psychologist come and work with the athletes occasionally, or do you plan time to do psych stuff for the players yourselves as you're talking about athletes and motivation? Yeah, good. So that we talk about athletes and motivation just as a coaching collective, but we do have psych support. So probably, Brett, you can detail how that looks. But I guess a nice thing to talk about there is where you think a coach's kind of value limit is when talking about stuff like, what would come under psych, so athlete motivation. Where do you see your value limit as a coach there? And when do you sort of go to the psych for a bit more support?
Yeah, it's a good one to talk about because we have a lady in the program who has just finished her master's and is actually starting a PhD and going into the accreditation of being a sports psychologist, which is a very long process, and you have to be pretty dedicated to get to that point. A lot of kind of unpaid volunteer work to get to there as well. A lot of hours you've got to put in. I guess there's a few different ways to talk about this. I think sports coaches do need a good grasp of sports psychology first and foremost. Is probably where my stance is, because ultimately our interactions are having some sort of impact on the players, and it will hopefully impact on their behaviour, which essentially is what sports psychology is, like how behaviours manifest themselves in people and the things that are driving those behaviours. The way we try and use it the most within hockey, and I think this is probably commonplace in most sports is the sports psychologist influences what I do as a coach and what Andy will do as a coach, and then we're probably more informed to then bring out whatever it is you want to bring out in the player. I'll give you an example of that. So we had a player a couple of years ago who wasn't particularly good in games, dealing with umpires and bad decisions and other bits and pieces. The two options were, okay, let's send her off to a sports psychologist. Let's have those conversations, come up with strategies and other bits and pieces. Or the other approach is actually, what can we do in training? What can I do as a coach to give her opportunities to be able to regulate and manage her emotions in training sessions, so she's ready to do it more in games?
Mm.
And we had a bit of a combination of both. We really tried hard in training sessions to maybe not umpire as well as what you would other players. So she had an opportunity to get annoyed at me, get annoyed at umpires, and then regulate that, have a strategy in place, which was to breathe before she then made a decision, or make sure she did the action of whatever it is she needed to do. So jump back, retreat 5, get ahead, whatever it was, before she then started to rant and rave and whatever. And then it's a debrief with myself, with maybe some set questions that I might want to put forward, or a debrief with the psychologist at that point. Before I go about the limiting factor for coaches, the limiting factor is the amount of psychologists. If you only have one, which is pretty typical, the sports psychologist we've got for roughly 2 days a week, which is a lot. We've got 27 players in the program at the moment. 27 players divided by 2 days is a very short amount of time. So actually impacting me to impact the players is a much better way of doing it. But there is times when players probably do need to see that sports psychologist with certain performance gains they may look to have. It might be how to get a boost in confidence, and there might be some pretty specific things that sports psychologists could ask or could probe on that might help with that. Equally, there could be conversations that, and there is some questions I could ask that would bring out things that would help your players' confidence, that kind of stuff. I guess my lack of knowledge in a real depth way for sports psychology is going to be my limiting factor, and actually understanding what my behaviours would do to certain players consciously or unconsciously would be a big thing. For example, if a player made a mistake, what would my reaction be? So if I went, or whatever, would that have a negative impact? Or conversely, if a player made a mistake and I gave them praise or said a comment which probably wouldn't suggest that what she did was wrong, or let's say a player went to training sessions, they thought they performed 6 out of 10 for the session, I then go over to them and said, that was a great session, well done. They may then in turn think that I think they're 6 out of 10. That's the best they're able to deliver. So just being very conscious of what my behaviours do to their thinking is probably something I need to be really aware of, and actually a limiting factor in what I can deliver from a sports psychology perspective.
Yeah, I think that's something we've done pretty well last few years, is knowing when there's been a sufficient red flag with a player where you go, this is definitely the territory we need to think about psych support, and when it's just sort of business as usual, we make sure that it's Svetlina or Carl, we have conversations and they sort of guide what we do, rather than anything go, you need to go and see them, because you kind of feel like you're just signposting for the sake of signposting. So we've got a responsibility as coaches to have informed practice and know what a red flag is, if there is anything in that area that we shouldn't be then dealing with. But I certainly think that conversations with Svetlina and our IDT and the presentations I've seen from Carl as like a psych lead at the university, you just get better at one-on-ones with players, and you get better at interactions with players. And that point that Brett's just finished with there, like, every interaction matters and has an impact. So understanding how you react and what how you're perceived as a coach has an impact. I think that's a very logical start point for thinking about that, the psych piece in your sessions. Just had a very good question from Olivia again. Do the team ever get involved in choosing which session they want to carry out, what they want to work on, or is it more set in what you believe is best for the focus? So we have had this discussion, 2 weeks ago, Brett? And because we're at the moment, our program is 2 coaches and 2 players. So Brett and I get a coach a day a week, with 2 players that are on elite dispensation training. So they're allowed to train because they're elite, but they're outside of England hockey remit, because the England hockey remit means their elite dispensation is England only, but we have a Scottish girl and an Irish girl who can train in with us at Loughborough. So at the moment, it's 2 coaches, 2 players. And what we're doing with them, and the step we wanted to take was really in this phase, they more or less plan their own sessions in the one-to-ones with us. And it's based on what we said earlier about you'd be more likely to learn and retain something that you're really invested in. So they've got their IDPs, they have one-to-ones with us, with not on a pitch, and then they've got performances early in the season to reflect on. They've basically been planning those sessions. So the night before, we have a little WhatsApp group with 4 of us in. They'll send a message what they want to do with Brett on a Wednesday and with me on a Saturday. And then me and Brett have a shared notes page where we write what happened in the session, how it went, etc. So at the moment, we're doing that, but it's kind of new for us, isn't it, in this way of working? So, yeah, what are your thoughts on that one, Brett?
Yeah, I think this is really well. I'd prefer to be out there with the team with everyone. I think that's the environment that we love being in. But it's also really great that we get to be on the pitch and delivering the small part that we do at the moment. And just on this, then I can't expand on it. So, yeah, getting the players to really understand what is the area they want to work on, what's the context when they may see it, what's the skill that they're going to use within it, and then what's the technical points of it. So, using the hockey example for us, it might be one player wants to play on the right and deliver the ball down the right a little more. Right, okay, what's the context? Okay, the ball might come from this area, I might have pressure from here, and I need to be able to pick that player out who's leading that way. Okay, so what's the skill? Well, skill is ability to receive across our body, having good vision already, this type of pass. Great, and then what's the skill level that needs to be there? Is your hands, is your footwork, is where your head is, and all those kind of areas. So really getting them to invest the time, really understanding what it is that they want to bring out of it. And the other question that you put in, Andy, which I thought was brilliant, is what support do you want from us as coaches at that session? And it might be they say, well, I want you to plan a bit of this in terms of the exercise, and maybe they want to put a bit of pressure on, and maybe that you want us as coaches to look at a certain area of my footwork, of my whatever, it might be to video, etc., etc. But again, really owning that part of the process. From a team perspective, we've done this in different ways. So we've had sessions where players have gone away and planned it all, or we've had a couple of people that would plan areas of the session. Something that I've taught you, probably not enough of, is goalies preparing sessions going to work on something that they want to work on, so maybe right hand side saves or something like that, and designing the forwards practice that goes with it. So they design the forward practice to give them lots of practice of those kind of saves. Mm-hmm. The bit I'd kind of add that we probably do on a regular basis is involve them in the structure of the sessions. So if the end outcome is this, and we're pretty clear, either pre-sessions priming or beginning the session as we get there, we want to try and get lots of practice today. We want to try and get to this point. Ask them as the session goes on, are we getting there? And if we're not, what do we need to do differently to kind of adjust it to get to that position? Yeah, it's how it all kind of plans out. So macro level, questions that kind of driving bits in the session, right down to individual players planning certain sessions, then individual planners planning their own individual personal one-to-one session is how we probably see that. But also within the phases, there's probably players engaging in that overarching planning phase as well. What do they think is important in the sessions now? There's always a question in the reviews that are linked to that. And there's lots of ways that we would ask that question.
Mm-hmm. Very good. We're just gone over 7, and as we established earlier, we have to be strict with our timings, and we don't want to go run on when, we said we had the expectation at 7, it's now 2 minutes past. But does anyone have anything really pressing they want to ask in the chat or come off mute? We have a typer, which is good. I can't see who it is on the iPad.
I think you might be going for a while, actually.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, was it the one that's typing from the very beginning?
Maybe.
No.
Where can we access the replay of the meeting is one question. So that's one for you, Alex.
That I can answer. That one. So I've recorded it, and then it will be uploaded onto the CVA website. I'll share with you the exact link right now. It doesn't get uploaded until like a couple of weeks later, so be patient, please. There's loads of actually information on there, all the recorded stuff that we have done with Andy previously, so please have a look at it. Really useful stuff on there. Yeah, Andy, Brett, thank you very much. for delivering the session tonight. It was really good.
Thank you, Alex. What I've just done for everyone quickly is I've done it at the end of everything. I'm sure Brett won't mind me doing it. There are email addresses in the chat if you really wanted to drop us a line and follow up on anything that we didn't cover tonight.
Yeah, I think Lewis, with regards to your question, I think emailing them directly would be the best, and then they can share any templates if they can with you. I don't know what copyright stuff you guys got or anything going on.
Not got it yet. It's still pending, isn't it, Brett? All that.
We've not made our millions yet. I think we're way off, unfortunately.
But yeah, thank you again, Brett, for joining us tonight, and Andy for delivering the session. It was really useful. As you can see in the comments, everyone's saying thank you and how good it was. But yeah, any last questions, guys? Any last comments?
My probably going to say just on that, do feel free to reach out. Obviously, the email address is there in non-COVID times. More, it's like open door. If you want to come down and watch them, more than welcome to. Have a conversation afterwards. Yeah, all good.
Thank you for your time, Brett.
Just going back to that, that's what I still do now, and I try and do every opportunity we can. And last evening went down to Reading, watched the coach, just go coach, have a chat with him, a coffee with him afterwards. You can never stop learning, picking up little things, even if it's something you don't want to do in your sessions. From something you observe, that's equally as important of going and seeing stuff that you do like.
Absolutely. And yeah, thank you for your time, Brett. Really appreciate you coming on and giving up an hour of your evening.
All good. I do it. I've got nowhere else to be.